National Security Advisor Ri Song-nak says that the South Korean government will mobilize all possible means to protect Korean nationals in Cambodia and ensure the swift repatriation of those detained there. Seoul's response team also met with the Cambodian Prime Minister on Thursday to look into the recent string of crimes targeting Koreans in the country. The Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy and the Industry Minister are on their way to the U.S. to fine-tune follow-up tariff negotiations with Washington, which the two officials say they are positive about. And with high hopes over a positive outcome between Seoul and Washington, South Korea's benchmark KOSPI broke through the 3,700 mark for the first time on Thursday. Following the recent deaths of a Korean woman in her 30s near the Vietnam-Cambodian border and a college student killed by an organized crime gang, a government response team arrived in Cambodia's capital on Wednesday to address the growing string of crimes targeting South Koreans. And the South Korean government has once again promised an all-out response. Our Pyeongyang starts us off.
National Security Advisor Ri Song-nak said on Thursday that the government will mobilize all possible means to protect Korean nationals in Cambodia and ensure the swift repatriation of those detained. He said President Lee Jae-myung has ordered an all-out response, calling for tighter coordination between ministries and embassies in the region. We explained that a joint government team led by Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah arrived in Phnom Penh around midnight Wednesday and has already held meetings with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet and senior officials from Cambodia's Online Scam Response Committee. He said both sides agreed to strengthen cooperation on repatriating Korean suspects, clarifying autopsy findings in the recent death cases, and preventing additional crimes. We said the government will also strengthen international cooperation to root out the scam industry, which he described as a massive organized operation involving some 200,000 people across multiple countries. To tackle the problem, we said Seoul will work closely with Vietnam, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian nations, as well as the United States, the United Nations, OECD, and ASEAN. He added that a full review of all 190 overseas diplomatic missions will be conducted to identify potential risks of similar crimes against Korean nationals worldwide. Plans are also under discussion to trace and confiscate profits gained from these scams through international cooperation. Domestically, we said the government will tighten oversight of online job postings that lure Koreans abroad, strengthen prevention and monitoring mechanisms, and pursue legal action against those linked to transnational scam rings. President Lee has also instructed officials to work with the Korea Communication Standards Commission to swiftly remove misleading recruitment ads still circulating online. We also addressed concerns over the ambassador vacancy in Phnom Penh, saying that a senior official from Seoul has been dispatched temporarily to oversee operations. According to officials, roughly 1,000 Koreans are believed to be caught up in so-called job scam networks across Cambodia. We stated that Cambodian authorities have also detained more than 2,000 people in recent large-scale crackdowns on online scam operations, including around 60 Korean nationals, whose repatriation, we said, remains the government's top priority. We said the exact number of Koreans involved is still being verified, but those set for repatriation this week are primarily detainees already identified by local authorities. Pyeongyang, Arirang News.
Tariff negotiations between South Korea and the U.S. appear to be reaching its final stage, with officials from both sides hinting a deal is imminent. Additional negotiators from Seoul are joining their economic chiefs in Washington to iron out the remaining trade details this week. Our Moon Hae-dun has this report.
Top South Korean officials expressed a positive outlook on trade talks with Washington ahead of follow-up negotiations. Speaking to reporters at Incheon Airport on Thursday, Kim Yong-bum, Presidential Chief of Policy, shared his views on recent U.S. commentary signaling that negotiations are coming to a close.
With the U.S. Treasury and Commerce Departments communicating together more closely than before, we are viewing this positively.
Kim Jong-kwan, Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, added that details are still being finalized, but misunderstandings have been largely resolved. He also stressed that negotiations must meet national interests.
I believe it is far more important that any outcome aligns with our national interests and the understanding of our citizens.
The South Korean delegation, including Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, already in Washington for the G20 Finance Ministers meeting, will be visiting the U.S. Office of Management and Budget on Thursday local time. This follows remarks from U.S. President Donald Trump, who said that South Korea signed a deal to make an upfront payment to invest in the United States. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday local time, Trump added that Japan pledged $650 billion and South Korea $350 billion. In reality, Japan's investment commitment stands at $550 billion, and Seoul has already pushed back on the idea of a direct cash payment, warning it could trigger financial instability. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent remarked that he expects something from trade talks with Seoul to come within the next 10 days, as they are in the process of ironing out the details. When asked whether the U.S. is willing to offer South Korea an unlimited currency swap, he drew a line saying it is a matter for the Federal Reserve. However, he added that if he were the Fed chair, South Korea would already have a currency swap facility similar to Singapore's. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Following high hopes over tariff negotiations between Seoul and Washington, South Korean stocks extended their record-breaking rally on Thursday, with the benchmark KOSPI closing above 3,700 points for the first time. Our Park Junan has the details.
South Korea's benchmark KOSPI closed past the 3,700 mark for the first time on Thursday, extending its record-breaking rally. The KOSPI opened at just over 3,675 points, up 0.51% from Wednesday's close. It then broke the 3,700 mark during the morning and closed at over 3,748 points, a 2.49% increase since Wednesday's close. Samsung Electronics shares also hit an all-time intraday trading high, surpassing the 97,000 Korean won mark during the day to close at 97,700 won. Also a record high. According to the Korea Exchange, Samsung Electronics last recorded an intraday all-time high more than 4 years ago on January 11, 2021, when it reached 96,801.
Foreign investor sentiment toward the semiconductor sector has strengthened significantly. Many are taking a bullish view that while the previous semiconductor cycle typically lasted around 3 years, this one could continue through 2033.
South Korea's automobile giants Hyundai Motor and Kia Corporation also saw a strong performance on Thursday. The two stocks rose by 8.28% and 7.23% respectively. Despite a previous sluggish stock performance due to high U.S. tariffs on South Korean automobiles, investors are betting on hopes that tariff negotiations with the U.S. could enter their final stages.
I think today's gains in auto stocks largely reflect optimism over trade negotiations between South Korea and the U.S.
Now the KOSPI is past 3,700, investors are eyeing whether the index could reach 4,000 before the year's end. The KOSPI continues to rally on government policy support, improving investor sentiment and optimism over third-quarter earnings, raising expectations that the momentum could carry through the months ahead. Park Junan, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung, who has been saying that cutting red tape is a key to South Korea's economic growth, chaired another open debate today, which was joined by ministers, business leaders, and experts. And this time, the focus was on the biotech, energy, and culture sectors. Our President Office correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
From a no to a yes. President Lee Jae-myung is calling for a paradigm shift in South Korea's regulatory approach, again emphasizing that cutting red tape is key to the country's economic recovery.
어떤 규제라고 하는 게 허용되는 것을 공무원들이 정하기에는 세상이 너무 복잡하고 너무 빨리 변해요. 이제는 그래서 꼭 문제되는 거 아니면은 원칙적으로 허용한다는 관점으로 모두 전환을 좀 했으면 좋겠다.
The president made the remarks on Thursday while presiding over his administration's second open debate on regulatory reform. The debate focused on easing restrictions in biotech, energy, and culture. Industry leaders pointed to South Korea's lengthy drug approval process, which takes about 420 days on average.
Speed matters in every industry, but in biotech, it's directly tied to people's lives and to patents that drive innovation and profit. We need more qualified reviewers at the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety.
In response, the ministry plans to add 300 new reviewers and speed up the process, aiming to cut approval time to under 240 days. In the energy sector, the government will streamline import procedures for recycled resources like used batteries and lower the 3% import tariffs next year. This is to secure key minerals such as lithium and rare earths, a move already pursued by major economies like the US and Japan. On the cultural front, debate explored ways to revive South Korea's struggling film industry, hit hard by the rise of streaming services.
We urgently need an emergency injection of government funds to resuscitate our film industry. Once capital starts circulating, producers will have more choice, and major films can return to theaters.
For that, a fund worth 700 billion won, or around $500 million, will be set up next year to support local productions while expanding tax credits for film companies. Aiming to shift the government's role from a regulator to a growth partner, more industry-specific discussions and deregulation measures are expected to follow once the Presidential Committee on Regulatory Reform is launched. 송유진, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to visit South Korea from October 29th to 30th in time for APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju. That is, according to South Korea's National Security Advisor Ri Song-rak on Thursday, adding that a South Korea-U.S. summit is expected during that time, declining to further comment on the issue. Trump is also set to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping during his stay in Korea. The Korean company continues to face weak growth in overall production, largely attributed to a contraction in the construction sector. But the general trend consumption appears to be improving. This assessment comes from the Korea Development Institute's latest monthly economic green book released on Thursday. Manufacturing indicators improved as continued growth in passenger car retail sales is driving a surge in motor vehicle output. Now, other retail sales also showed a gradual easing of weakness, supported by lower interest rates and government consumption support measures. Now, meanwhile, downside risks to economic activity persist amid global trade uncertainties driven by the recent escalation of tensions between the U.S. and China. South Korea's Supreme Court has sent back the high-profile divorce case involving SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won for reconsideration. So the court overturned a record-breaking ruling worth about $980 million that ordered him to pay his estranged wife. Our Park Hyo-bin reports.
South Korea's top court on Thursday morning overturned a lower court's ruling that ordered SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won to pay his estranged wife Do So-young around 1.3 trillion won, or about $980 million in asset division. The ruling comes 8 years after Choi first filed for divorce mediation in 2017 and a year and a half after the Seoul High Court's decision in May last year, which had marked the largest divorce settlement in South Korean history. The case will now return to the Seoul High Court for a new review. Choi's legal team welcomed the ruling, while no side said they had no particular comment.
We hope today's ruling will clear up any misunderstandings or speculation. The plaintiff will do his best to proceed with sincerity in the retrial.
At the center of the ruling was the question of asset division. The court determined that the 30 billion won, or about $21 million Do received from her late father, former President Do Tae-woo, cannot be considered part of her contribution in the property division, as it was obtained through illegal means. As such, the justices ruled that the SK shares that stem from those funds retain their illegality, and that Do So-young cannot legally claim them as part of her contribution to the company's growth. This means that the final amount Choi must pay in the property division will likely be readjusted in the retrial. However, the court upheld the previous ruling of 2 billion won, or roughly $1.4 million in compensation. Following the Supreme Court's decision, SK's stock plunged by 7% as investor sentiment weakened, even as the broader KOSPI index remained on an upward trend. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, Israel and Hamas have reportedly begun talks on the second phase of the U.S. proposed peace deal. However, doubts over reaching an agreement are rising as the first phase has yet to be completed following delays in the handover of the bodies of dead Israeli hostages. Our Park Kwon-woo has more.
The second phase of negotiations between Israel and Hamas is now underway despite the failure to complete the first one. As of Wednesday, only 9 out of 28 bodies of Israeli hostages killed while in captivity have been handed over by Hamas to Israel with the help of the Red Cross. Although the deadline for the full delivery passed earlier this week, U.S. President Donald Trump said Hamas was doing its job amid accusations that it's failing to comply with the deal.
Well, they're looking for him, absolutely. They're looking. It's a gruesome process. I almost hate to talk about it, but they're digging. They're actually digging. There are areas where they're digging and they're finding a lot of bodies.
Washington is reportedly working with mediators to help recover and return the remaining bodies. However, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said Wednesday that the Israel Defense Forces are preparing a plan to renew the fighting and completely defeat Hamas if necessary. The second phase of the 20-point peace plan led by Trump includes thornier issues such as post-war governance in Gaza and the disarmament of Hamas. Trump has said the U.S. military will not be involved in the disarmament process. One of the key sticking points remains who would oversee Gaza's security after Hamas's disarmament. Mediators are reportedly discussing the possible dispatch of 1,000 Palestinian police trained by Egypt and Jordan. But this could face pushback as Israel has resisted security assistance from the Palestinian Authority. With several contentious issues still unresolved, eyes are on whether both sides can reach any meaningful agreement down the road. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea resumed a project on Wednesday to excavate the remains of soldiers killed during the Korean War in the demilitarized zone after 3 years. According to the Defense Ministry, the move is a part of efforts to ease military tensions on the Korean peninsula. The two Koreas had agreed to retrieve remains of soldiers from former battlefields inside the DMZ when signing the September 19th military agreement in 2018. Seoul began work at Arrowhead Ridge and expanded the project to Whitehorse Ridge as well, though the North did not take part. The project was suspended in late 2022 as inter-Korean ties deteriorated. In today's Culture Report, we look at a transformation of concert halls and museums that are becoming more interactive. Special lectures are now being held where audiences can listen to music of masters of classical music, accompanied by commentary experts from that field, or sessions where the museum director explains the artwork before or after viewing the exhibition. Our Yoon-jin has more.
A scene from the film Before Sunrise is projected on a large screen, along with the classical music featured in the movie's ending credits. In a concert hall typically reserved for orchestras and vocalists, a former radio producer takes the stage to explain the life and music of Baroque master Johann Sebastian Bach.
I've worked in classical radio broadcasting for over 30 years. Throughout my career, I've always thought about how to make classical music more accessible and enjoyable to more people.
On a weekday afternoon, the venue's lobby is bustling with middle-aged and older attendees who've given up their lunch breaks to attend this free lecture that they've registered for in advance. The lecture sessions that blend musical insights with references to films and famous personalities associated with classical music are fully booked.
I've been attending the lectures from the first session. I'm really interested in classical music. I've been to concerts before, but this is my first time studying and learning about it through a lecture like this.
3 lectures remain through November, focusing on the music of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Museum director Yoo Hong-jun, well known for his book My Exploration of Cultural Heritage, uses his signature lecture style to break down the value and cultural spirit of early Joseon Dynasty art. These lectures are connected to ongoing exhibitions at the National Museum of Korea, including topics like white porcelain, calligraphy, paintings, and Buddhist sculptures. The layered multimedia presentations, complete with presentation slides and historical background, attracted an eager audience who managed to secure seats despite fierce competition during online reservations. The venue that seats hundreds was packed.
When I heard that director Yoo Hong-jun would be giving a lecture, I waited a long time for this date. It was really hard to get a spot through online registration. After the lecture, I'm planning to see the exhibition New Nation, New Art.
For those who haven't seen the exhibition, the lecture serves as a preview. For those who have, it becomes a review.
Viewing ancient art can be difficult if you're not an expert, but after attending a lecture, you can better understand why early Joseon art is meaningful, beautiful, and worth preserving.
As concert halls filled with classical music and museums housing cultural treasures become infused with in-depth knowledge, they are evolving into a cultural space with a new purpose, a venue for artistic learning and lectures. 이은진, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Washington, the U.S. government shutdown has stretched into its third week, with lawmakers still deadlocked over spending and health care. Analysts warn the standoff is beginning to cloud the global economic outlook. Wednesday's ninth failed Senate vote left federal workers unpaid and vital services frozen. Key indicators like the monthly jobs report and inflation data are delayed, leaving policymakers and investors without accurate numbers. Analysts compare the disruption to a major storm, with each week shaving about 0.2 percentage points or $15 billion off quarterly growth. Looking ahead, the longer Washington remains gridlocked, the greater the risk that the U.S. data blackout becomes a drag on worldwide growth. U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed that he authorized the CIA to operate inside Venezuela, calling it a response to drug trafficking and migrant releases by President Nicolas Maduro's government. Speaking at the White House on Wednesday, Trump said U.S. forces have already carried out 5 raids at sea, killing 27 people, and that Washington is now looking at land operations. The announcement marks a rare public acknowledgement of a covert directive and a sharp escalation of pressure on Caracas. Meanwhile, Maduro's government has ordered military drills and vowed to defend Venezuela against aggression. Trump has deployed warships, a submarine, and fighter jets to the Caribbean as part of his anti-narcotics campaign. Global carbon dioxide levels are at its highest ever recorded, rising by 3.5 parts per million from 2023 to 2024, the sharpest annual increase since measurements began in 1957. The World Meteorological Organization says the surge is driven by fossil fuel burning and wildfires, especially across South America. Officials warn the heat trapped by greenhouse gases is turbocharging the planet and fueling more extreme weather. Methane and nitrous oxide have also hit record highs, while the planet's natural carbon sinks. Forests, land, and oceans are losing their ability to absorb emissions. WMO says the Amazon's trees, stressed by drought and heat, are now struggling to photosynthesize, a sign that nature's defenses are faltering. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
We enjoyed more pleasant autumn weather this morning under blue skies. Then more clouds rolled in this afternoon. However, the rain has not entirely left the country. Eastern regions and Jeju will get on and off spotty showers through tonight. Then another band of rain will return from the western regions late on Friday night. But it will be rather cloudy tomorrow in most parts, with a glimpse of morning sunshine in the capital area. Starting off the day with temperatures similar to today in the the capital and Daejeon at 17 degrees, but warmer on Jeju. Now, it's going to be similar to tomorrow, as the afternoon highs will be similar to today's, getting up to 24 degrees here in Seoul, Daegu, Gyeongju, but again, Jeju will be warmer at 27 degrees. Showers that arrive late tomorrow will cover much of the country through Saturday, but once they clear, colder air will rush in. And by Sunday, Seoul's morning lows will drop down to just 8 degrees, bringing late autumn weather to Korea. With that in mind, here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have at this hour. We'll be back later at 8 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.